I'm Thomas from Meaningful Gigs, and welcome back to Heroes of the Creative Revolution. In this episode, I speak with DesignOps Veteran Michelle Chu about leading a DesignOps team of one. In this first part, she talks about DesignOps for marketing, brand, and product, the importance of using common language, and using data to improve buy-in across teams. Let's dive in. Hi, Michelle. Great to see you. Thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, and would love to get into, all things operating as a DesignOps team of one. But first, would love to kind of understand more about your background, how you got here today.
Sure. I'm Michelle Chu. I have been working in design and design operations for about 20 years. I love the creative process and spent the early part of my career creating marketing and branding materials, and then transitioned into design project management. Worked in packaging design, then switched to digital, worked to deliver websites and apps, then switched into working at a startup for user research, where I learned all about product management and using data to drive decisions, and most recently worked at a unicorn startup where I was the first DesignOps hire for the company. So now I am focused more on consulting, and basically just using my experience in all these areas to help basically fine-tune processes for maximum benefit to companies.
And so when we talked before, you've talked about specifically DesignOps for brand, DesignOps for marketing, DesignOps for product. Like, what are the overlaps and what are the similarities? And I guess in particular, what can each kind of learn from each other?
Sure. I think, in thinking about answering that, I think what most people do is they look at the thing that is to be created, and that's how they make the differentiation, right? So broad strokes, product is usually some type of platform, right? It could be an app service. It could be something more designed for desktop with like a lot more dashboards and functionality. And marketing and brand is defined more as the logo, the colors, the look and feel. And then there's some overlap, right? Because you have a lot of marketing websites that function like product, and you have design elements in the product that are essentially branding and marketing. So I think it's really important to note that there's no hard and fast delineation. They all interweave into each other. And where they cross over, it kind of depends, but everyone's using the same set of assets and goals. So, in general, everyone's using the same logo and colors. In general, everyone is trying to push the same value prop for whatever it is you're trying to sell. Those are your guiding principles. I think where people, in my opinion, miss opportunities is for those teams to collaborate, right? Because the branding and marketing side might have had a great idea for a visual aspect of the platform that the product team can use. And conversely, this happened at my last company. The product team the product designers had a really great idea on how to redo our marketing website and show the features of the platform in a more interactive way, because they were so closely connected to what those features were. And I think that that's where I think the beauty is of learning from each other. And I had the opportunity to work with the branding and the product designers to create that more cohesive language. Often when we do design work, it's a game of telephone. And so you have the product marketing manager talking to the marketing designer, brand designer, whatever you call it. You have the product manager talking to the product designer. You have the product marketing manager talking to the product manager. So that's how that works. You don't usually have the brand designer talking to the product designer. And I don't know why that is. But, designers have a common language. And that to me is a missed opportunity to have designers talk to designers and co-create solutions that will actually work better for the company and for each team. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Yeah, I guess what you're saying. There are a lot of basically, I hate to use the word, but synergies that can be applied to help, design or product development across the board between these three areas, kind of talking to each other and using each other's resources for their work, right?
Yes, that's a really good point. There can be a lot of efficiency gained. I've worked in teams where product designers were asked by a product manager, like one product designer was asked by a product manager to create a set of assets that another product designer already created, that another marketing designer already created. And then we had 3 different sets of assets, and they were all fine, but it kind of creates redundancy, right? Why is that? So part of reducing that redundancy is communication. Part of reducing that redundancy is also creating a centralized place to store assets that is labeled and organized in a way that everyone can just dip in and grab. And that doesn't have to be on the design team. It could be anyone in the company. But how do we reduce this redundancy? And actually, once you remove that redundancy, you can actually co-create better solutions for whatever you have on the horizon.
You've obviously talked a lot about operating as a design ops team of one. And then I think the latest Design Ops Assembly industry survey even shows that that's like basically a third or like a quarter of the people in the design ops space are teams of one. And, from your vast experience, how have you found success actually working with non-design stakeholders in order to, have an effective impact on the design team and a company's design?
Yeah, I was the first DesignOps hire at 4 different places. So I have a lot of knowledge of being the only person working on this problem. I was actually reflecting on this, and I'm ethnically Chinese. I was born in the US, and I do not speak Chinese very well. And I basically spent my early years at family dinners not understanding much. And there were a handful of phrases that I knew. And there were a few things that whenever my mother would say them, I understood them. So I got so hungry to understand what was going on that I became a very good active listener, just grabbing onto whatever word or phrase I understood. And I realized that I've just been using that for all of the communication. So when I talk to non-design stakeholders, they're usually phrasing things in English in their language. Sales language, they use terms around pitch and target, and they have to hit a quota, and they have like a lot of assets that they need to drive basically a sale. Marketing people have similar language, but they might talk about, the proposition and, their target audience and who they're trying to bring into the pipeline. And engineers might talk about their sprint cycles and reusing components. And product people might talk about data, and they might talk about, unique value proposition, or there's a million terms here, right? So when I'm talking to somebody from a specific stakeholder group, and that could be a designer as well, I listen to what phrases and words they're saying, and then I say them back. And that is my way of connecting with them immediately. Like, we're on the same page. I understand what you're trying to do here. When you're talking with outside clients, which can be any of those people or have a different view on the project, they're gonna talk about like, how are we gonna make sure like a bunch of people buy this thing? How are we gonna get people in that pipeline? How are we gonna make sure our message is clear? They might not use specific design terms, but that's their goal, right? So really being on the same page, and being very committed to delivering what it is they ask for, and giving it to them when they say they wanted it. At the same time, it makes better relationships when you clearly define what is required from these partners for the design team to deliver on that promise. And that is where I think it gets a little messy in certain places. But being very clear from the design team's perspective up front, what information is necessary to execute on this request in the time allowed. What the requirements are going to vary depending on what it is you're delivering, depending on if you're delivering in a sprint cycle versus if you are delivering for a marketing campaign that has us like a several-month lead time. It's going to vary. But it's really, really important to nail those details down at the beginning of the process and to hold those stakeholders accountable for giving that information as well. So it's really like a partnership where each side has their piece to play, and really being transparent and clear about what information I need from those stakeholders in order for the design team to be successful.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, and I like how you started off with first trying to meet them kind of like at their playing field, at their level, by speaking their vocabulary, their vernacular, and then also, recognizing that it's not just a subservient relationship, it's a partnership where both people need to commit and do their role for everybody to be successful. I think that's great. How do you use data to improve the process, workflow management, and just overall buy-in and respect in an organization?
So, when I worked in product, I was required to supply data to make product decisions. I mean, that was just full stop. And I think people get a little stuck on what that means, right? I think sometimes when you think of data, you think of what can you generate from the website? Like what ream of information can you get from your users? What I did was start very small. So in this example, I had to reduce delivery time for design work offsite from 2 weeks to 3 hours. How do you do that? You have to figure out what's taking time. and so at a very basic level, I thought to myself, what information do I have? What I had was emails and timestamps. So I just started measuring time. I would send an email. I would get an email as a design request. I would write down the time, like in Google Sheets. I'm a big fan of Google Sheets. I would, write down the time I'd send an email to a designer. I'd write down the time the email came back from me with design work. And then I would usually immediately send that out. But I'd measure the time between each leg, and then I'd measure the time that I received feedback back from either my customer service manager or the client. And I would measure that. And then I had, after a few weeks, benchmark data on where the slowdowns were in the process, right? No surprise here, there were 2 basic slowdowns, which, spoiler alert, happens everywhere. So, one big consistent issue is a designer is going to say, I don't have enough information. And then the other consistent slowdown is feedback from the client or whoever requested it is taking a while, or it has a lot of revisions that slow down the process. So I attacked those 2 areas from 2 different angles. I basically staffed designers that I thought were more seasoned, that would have fewer hesitations and questions around doing the design work. And then I voiced in our meetings, in our weekly and daily meetings, that we had these slowdowns coming from the client side. And so a decision was made company-wide that if we didn't get feedback by a certain time from clients, that we were going to use the design anyway. So that's not going to work in every organization. But that worked in ours. And I did actually do it. I shaved the delivery time from offsite designers to 3 hours or less in about a few months. So it can happen, but you have to understand like what you're trying to achieve. In that instance, I was trying to achieve reduction of time. If you want to do that and you want to also have a certain level of quality, then you have to also look at other factors. And then, maybe you start counting how many designs got 6 to 10 rounds of additional feedback versus how many designs only got 1 round or didn't get any at all. Maybe you count who is requesting the work. In my last company, I was able to tie requests to certain teams, and then I was able to give a visual breakdown of the percentage of each team requesting design. So why is that useful? Because then you can figure out which teams are not getting the work they need and which teams are. There's a million examples I can give, but basically it just comes down to figuring out what data points you need to actually solve the problem that you want to solve and answer the questions you want to answer, and then see what you can count. And you count, who, like, if you have stakeholders that are very vocal, can you count how many requests that person asks for in a week, in a month? There's many things. Yeah, are there some examples?
No, that's super great. And I love how you're tying it into, start with what you can do, right? As you said, it can be daunting, but like you can count, you can observe, you can start your data from there. Wonderful.